So first things first, when should you travel to Istanbul? So if we look at the average temperature in Istanbul, you can see that really the peak times to come, if you're favoring higher temperature, is mid-May to mid-October. And that's for people that prefer this warmer vacation. Obviously, if you want cooler, you can come in January, March, or October to December. We went during June and July, so that would be pretty much their peak summer, so we got the full summer heat, and it wasn't that bad. Yes, some days were hot and staying out of the sun during peak hours, so around noon to 4 p.m., it's not hard to avoid that. So if we look at rainfall, you can see that during those summer months, rainfall's at a minimum, and that's kind of why we chose that. Our entire time there, we didn't actually see any rain for the entire vacation, and that's always nice. Looking into humidity, you can see that those summer months, the humidity is higher. Again, try to avoid being outside during those peak hours, or at least in the shade. You'll be fine. So the summer months are more touristy. Don't let that deter you though. So Istanbul is home to over 20 million people, and it is divided with a European region and an Asian region. So it's really massive, so don't worry about the 20 million people making things so congested. So looking at how you're actually going to get to Istanbul, assuming you're coming from the US, something like New York, planning for next summer, there's a few options you can actually do. You can fly directly to Istanbul, which looks right now to be the cheaper option. But when we were looking, and we booked this very far out, flying into Istanbul was actually extremely expensive. So what we did was we flew into Sofia. So you can fly into Sofia, Bulgaria, and we went with this route again, and it was 60% cheaper than the flight to Istanbul. So that's something to watch. Now from Sofia, you have two options that you can do. You can take a hopper flight from Sofia to Istanbul through Turkish Airlines. That's a little bit costly, but you can also take an overnight train from Sofia to Istanbul. So you can see here that the overnight train departs at 6:30 p.m. from Sofia, and then you arrive to Istanbul at 5:30 a.m. It's a nice train because you can buy a sleeper cabin, so you have a full bed, but you will get woken up in the middle of the night for the border crossing, and you'll be up for about an hour, hour and a half while they do all the passport check and baggage check. So overall, if you're pressed for time, flying right to Istanbul is your best bet. You're going to pay a little bit more, but if you're pressed for money, flying to Sofia and taking the overnight train, that's going to be your cheapest option. So if you're somewhere in the middle, maybe check out this option, flying to Sofia and then doing the hopper flight to Istanbul. So you've decided what month to travel and how you're going to get there. The next question is, where should you stay? On the European side, we recommend an area called Beyoğlu, or a little bit north of Galata. So we were located around this area here, and we found it really central. Walking to everything in this area, it was very convenient. We really didn't have any safety concerns the entire time in Istanbul, so that was great. Now obviously, our situation might not be your situation, but just don't walk around flashing the keys to your Lamborghini, and fit in with your surroundings. You'll be fine. Some good runner-ups were the Karakoy area, also the Cihangir area, excuse my pronunciation, for all Turkish things moving forward. They were very cafe focused. It was nice. It didn't beat our centralized location of where we were though. You also have Beşiktaş, and this was a little distance from many of the things we wanted to do, but all these areas are great runner-ups. Highly recommend them. Now, places I would avoid staying, that would be the Eminönü area, zooming in, kind of the Sultan Ahmet area, and kind of this lower section all combined. Anywhere really near the Grand Bazaar or Spice Bazaar. Now there's nothing terrible about those areas specifically, just a little bit too touristy for us, but if that's your cup of tea, go for it. So moving on to the Asian side, there's one area that we found that really didn't compare to anywhere else. So in the Karakoy area, there's a relatively small area called Moda, which is located here. This place is fantastic. Nothing but good reviews for this entire area. Another good area was the Üsküdar area. It's a good runner-up. It looked to be a very high-end area. We actually stumbled on this during a day trip, just to some excursions, and we were really happy with it. Speaking of day trips, how many days should you spend in Istanbul? How many days on each side? For the average person, I would recommend 5 full days on the European side, and then 6 days on the Asian side. Once you iron out your travel details, you'll probably need to make a travel budget, and that's where things get a little bit tricky. So if you haven't seen any headlines in the last year, maybe 2 years, the Turkish lira has been subject to massive inflation. So stability of the currency is questionable at best. Now you'll want to convert almost all the money you plan to spend in Istanbul while you're there. If you do it weeks or months beforehand, you're most likely going to lose money. But it is good to have some Turkish liras as you enter the country. Credit cards seem to work fine. We always try to use cash when we travel. So if you're also one of those people that tends to use cash, leave the cards at home, try to convert maybe $20 or so prior to coming, just to be safe. You can't convert at the Istanbul airport or whatever airport you are at and decide to convert at. Obviously, you're not going to get the best rate at any airport, so plan ahead and just have a small safety net. So while we were in Istanbul, we found the best places to convert money were either at the Grand Bazaar or actually on Istiklal Street. So there's many conversion locations. Not all of them are on Google Maps. If you just walk down Istiklal Street, you'll see all of these currency conversion places. And don't convert your money at the first one you see, because you might be able to get a better rate if you walk down the street. Now, the reason to have that safety net or some money in Turkish lira before converting it when you get here is you have to figure out how you're going to get from either the airport or the train station to your accommodation. And for that, don't take a taxi. Don't take a taxi anywhere in Istanbul. They're expensive. Granted, they do have to make a living and everybody needs money to survive, but taxis are extremely expensive compared to the public transportation that they have there. And their transportation is amazing. Hands down the best out of all the places we've been to. And using the trains, trams, metro, buses, all the public transportation, it's very simple. You just need one prepaid card. It's called the Istanbul card. Now trains cost around about 50 cents per person, and you don't have to sit in traffic. You get there, quick and easy. It's probably the fastest way to travel around in Istanbul. Now the Istanbul card you can buy and top up at every station, at the airport, practically anywhere you would need to use public transportation. And you can use one card for 2 people. You can also use it on the ferries. Ferries and trains run very frequent. Don't worry if you miss one. You'll get the next one. It's coming, don't worry. That being said, here's what the train lines look like in Istanbul. You can see how interconnected they are. So transfers are very straightforward, and they run to the airport all the way to the train station, where if you do the Sofia to Istanbul overnight train, you can just hop on and get to the city center of Istanbul. Now looking at the ferry lines, you can see that there's several routes going to each part of Istanbul, which is very convenient. So if you're traveling between the European and the Asian sides, I would recommend taking the ferry. You get to see Istanbul kind of as a whole, and the sunsets look amazing when you're on the ferry. And maybe most important, budget around $25 to $60 a day per person for spending. Now this would include shopping, food, excursions, anything else you want to do. $25 is probably the low end for being cost conscious of everything you spend, but I'm sure there's ways to spend less. And just some quick numbers about cost. So we got 10-liter jugs of water for about $1 each at grocery stores such as Migros. Migros appears to be kind of their bigger or more chain-like grocery store. They have different size Migros. There's things like a Migros Jet, 1M Migros, 2M. We even went to a 5M Migros at some point during this vacation. And they have pretty much everything you need for groceries. Cost-wise, they're pretty good too. So the public transportation is around 50 cents to $1.50, maybe a little bit more per person, but nothing crazy. Museums, excursions, things like Galata Tower, that was around $8 per person. Could be a little bit more now with inflation. Going out to eat, we calculated it about $8 per person. And then having a eSIM, so we used Air Alod, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, but we went with their highest plan because we were there for a while. But really, you only need about $12 to $18 to spend on that. That'll get you a good deal. And the eSIM worked really everywhere in Istanbul, no problems at all. And highly recommend it, because if you want to look up reviews for food, it's very helpful. Speaking of reviews for food, we ate a lot of food when we were there. Obviously, Turkish food is expected to be popular when you're here, but you can find almost anything you want. Some places we recommend that you try, and yes, they might not be traditional. We had a lot of traditional food, a lot of untraditional food. We ate our way through this city. The first place is a place called Ev. Now, maybe you've seen this place before, maybe you have not, but Butmiev is this small restaurant in Moda where you have the food being made essentially in front of you by these Turkish women. Now this food is fantastic. We enjoyed everything we had here, but one of the catches is we were having lunch between the both of us for $5 to $8. Another place that we recommend is called Chia Sofrasi. I think this place is famous for being on TV or something, so the prices are a little bit high. The place has a lot of food though, and it was really packed when we went there, and we kind of went there at an odd time, but the food was great. Now another place we recommend, which I believe is up in Üsküdar, that is Metet Kozde Doner. I'm not sure the popularity of this place, but it has a lot of reviews and pretty good reviews. This is where I fell in love with a dish called Iskandar kebabs. It's really amazing. They had really good food here. So then another place, which you could go right after getting food at the previous place, is this place called Bu ve Bu Dondurma. Now dondurma is the Turkish ice cream. It's a little bit different from what you may be used to in the United States, but it's really good. Great ice cream, very affordable, and unfortunately Istanbul brought out the ice cream monster in me that craved dondurma for the rest of this vacation. So moving on the list to a place called Cafe 6. They had this cheese-filled gozla meal. Let me see if I can find the menu. Yes, so it is a phyllo pastry filled with ricotta cheese topped with honey and cream. This thing was insane. We had a lot of gozleme our time in Istanbul. This one may not be as traditional, but this was a good combination. I wanted to come home and learn how to make this. Another good restaurant was Cafe Pravada. This was our introduction to Turkish breakfasts when we first arrived there, and it was good. You get a lot of food in Turkey, especially with Turkish breakfasts. Going a little bit north of Galata Tower, there's a place called Pizzeria Pera, which perhaps you would expect pizza and pasta. What's going on there? They have really good pizza, and they also had a pistachio pesto, and that was delightful. Now, when you're coming here, there's a few foods that you should really look for. There's some foods that we wanted to try. So here's a list of what we had when we first came into the country that we were particularly interested in. We wanted to find kind of the best versions of these foods. Now, it's a good template to follow for getting a feel on Turkish food, which we found Turkish food to be amazing. We never got food poisoning once, but as a safety net, always bring Imodium just in case. Now, there's a few places to avoid, simply because of cost and quality. And the first one is kind of this chain called Hafiz Mustafa. So there's a bunch of locations on Istiklal Street, and then you can see down here there's a lot of them. Yes, they are very old and serve many types of baklava. It kind of just seems that they're overpriced and more focused on grabbing the tourists. I'd recommend finding baklava elsewhere, and not having this as your first impression of what it's like in the country. The next place is Viana Kavesi. It's the place where you see all the San Sebastian cheesecake photos with the Galata Tower in the background. Again, expensive, touristy. I'm not too sure how the cheesecake thing became popular in Turkey. I don't even know if it's Turkish. I don't think it is. But for sure, don't get an entire meal there, otherwise you're going to lose all your money. Get your cheesecake picture. That's about it. And lastly, most places for food around touristy areas. So you have the Galata Tower, you have the Hagia Sophia Mosque, you have the Sultan Ahmet Mosque down here, you have the bazaars intertwined in here, and obviously around tourist attractions you're going to get tourist food. Nobody really wants to overpay for a meal that's not that good, and this is again where having that eSIM for your phone works fantastic. That being said, with all the tourist attractions, there are some things you should do. Galata Tower is nice, Grand Bazaar is nice. We like the Spice Bazaar more, or the Egyptian Bazaar, and when we went there, they pretty much force-fed me with Turkish Delights, which I was not opposed to. And Turkish Delights are kind of like a flavored marshmallow in my opinion, which isn't a knock on Turkish Delights, it's just kind of what I associated them with after I had them. I didn't know what to expect. Another place to go is this neighborhood called Balat. So it's a little bit away from everything, but it is a very interesting region. It's where all the colorful houses are. Kind of these retro style cars. A little bit touristy, but it's worth going to, in my opinion. You can go to Maiden's Tower. Parkiz Kulesi, which is kind of in between Üsküdar and Moda. I'm not sure if you're actually able to go to this exact spot, but the views from the sunset here are very nice. And then Topkapi Palace is also recommended, Hagia Sophia, and then Sultanahmet. So there's another mosque that I think is very nice, and it's in Üsküdar. And that is where we got this drone shot. And it is the Çamlıca Mosque. So finally, here's some useful tips when in Istanbul. Number one, it's cool if you know some Turkish, but not necessary. I spent about a year learning Turkish leading up to this trip. Didn't use it that much, but when I did use it, it did help in some situations. Number two, be ready for hills and bring some comfortable walking shoes. You're going to see hills everywhere, especially on the European side. On the Asian side, not too crazy, but on this European side, you're in for some hills. You're also going to see a lot of cats everywhere. If you don't like lamb, stick with the chicken options. Sometimes beef options are mixed with lamb. We found that out kind of more later down the journey. But if you don't like lamb, stick with the chicken options. The food is not crazy spicy, but it's very flavorful. It's fantastic. I'm sure you can ask to have it super spicy if that's your preference, but don't expect crazy levels of spice per se. At restaurants, reservations are not always necessary. Dinner seems to be after 7 to 8 p.m., so you get there before then, say 6 o'clock, you'll be fine. Following that, you don't need to be an early bird and wake up at 6 a.m. here. Even in peak season, we went to the mosques, we went there around 8 or 9 a.m., didn't have to wait in any lines. We were in, wasn't too crowded. It started getting really crowded around noon, but 8, 9 a.m., you're fine just before they open. Now sunscreen. Sunscreen is the only thing we noticed being oddly expensive. About $10 for a small bottle, which is kind of relative to what you might see in the United States right now. But given that everything else was much cheaper in Turkey, this kind of caught us a little off guard. Now for drone operators, if you have a drone over 250 grams, you'll have to register it, but if you're not a Turkish citizen, you might not be able to register it. But if it's under 250 grams, like the DJI Mini, the 1, 2, and 3, you can fly those without having to register them. So if you look online, drone laws in the country are kind of confusing. But if you're under 250 grams, it's very relaxed once you get there. And I actually printed out the document, which the link will be in the description, for the drone laws. And just kind of showed that to police when I was going to fly my drone. Just kind of asking, like, okay, is it fine? Because I didn't want my drone to get confiscated. Probably a real important one if you're in the summer months, make sure your accommodation has AC. Now, heat and humidity, not the most pleasant thing to sleep in. Fortunately, we had AC most of the time. But when we didn't have it, it kind of sucked a little bit, but it was doable. It's not the end of the world. And lastly, Turkish people are very helping and friendly. We didn't have a single bad experience while we were here. So that being said, if you found any of this information helpful, please comment, like, subscribe, share the video, so other people can benefit as well.